What happens when one of country music's biggest stars, someone accustomed to arenas filled with thousands of adoring fans, walks straight into the lion's den of daytime television? What happens when that superstar refuses to back down from one of the most outspoken, unflinching, and often merciless hosts in America? The answer: a confrontation so intense, so electric, and so unpredictable that it instantly becomes one of the most explosive moments ever seen on live television. From the very first second, the exchange was tense, unpredictable, and impossible to look away from. Every word, every glance, every subtle movement carried weight, and the energy in the studio was palpable, almost as if the walls themselves could feel the tension. Blake Shelton walked onto the set of The View with his usual confident swagger, a man who had spent years on stages commanding the attention of tens of thousands. His trademark grin was in place, calm and self-assured, signaling both charm and readiness. As he settled into the guest chair, the studio audience erupted into applause, a wave of excitement rolling through the room. Fans cheered, clapped, and called out his name, thrilled to see the country superstar in person rather than on a screen. The applause was loud, genuine, and at moments almost deafening, filling every corner of the studio with a palpable energy that seemed to electrify the air. Whoopi Goldberg, the host known for her warmth and ability to ease even the tensest situations, welcomed him with her trademark blend of humor and sincerity. At first, the conversation flowed easily. They discussed his latest album, upcoming tour dates, and the many milestones of his long and storied career in country music. It was a standard opening, familiar and comfortable, and for a moment, the tension in the room seemed poised to remain manageable. The audience relaxed slightly, leaning back in their chairs, momentarily enjoying the rare glimpse of the superstar in a conversational setting rather than a performance stage. But then the tone shifted. Joy Behar, known for her sharp wit and unapologetic style, leaned forward, her expression sharpening with the precision of a predator, sizing up her prey. She brought up recent comments Blake had made about the music industry and political correctness, remarks that had generated significant public attention, and in some quarters controversy. Her gaze was direct, her tone measured but firm, designed to elicit more than a standard PR response. Blake, however, kept his trademark smile, a practiced shield of confidence. But even behind that grin, his voice carried a noticeable edge, a firmness that suggested he was prepared to defend his position without concession. "People are tired," he said, "of being told what they can and can't say." His words cut through the studio's polite hum like a knife, making clear that this was not a casual conversation, but a debate over principles. He continued, his tone calm yet assertive. "Country music has always been about telling the truth, even when it makes people uncomfortable. That's what it's always been about." Joy, however, was not satisfied with this framing. She pressed further, leaning into the tension like a skilled journalist pushing for clarity. She questioned whether artists, especially those with the size of Blake's platform, had a responsibility to be mindful of their influence. Did their reach obligate them to consider the societal implications of their words? Did their celebrity confer a duty not merely to speak their minds, but to shape discourse responsibly? The underlying suggestion was clear. With great power comes great responsibility, and perhaps Blake had not fully recognized the weight of his platform. Blake fired back without hesitation. There was no fumbling, no careful avoidance of controversy, no attempt to curry favor with the audience. Instead, he spoke with the confidence of someone who had spent decades understanding both his art and his audience. "Audiences are smart enough to think for themselves," he said firmly. "They don't need celebrities or television hosts telling them what to believe or how to think." It was a statement both defiant and principled, asserting the autonomy of listeners while simultaneously reinforcing his own integrity as an artist who valued authenticity over appeasement. The tension in the studio became palpable. You could feel it vibrating through the cameras, the lights, the seats themselves. Audience members leaned forward, bracing for the next volley. Whispers passed between crew members. The energy was electric, a coiled spring of anticipation, because everyone sensed that the exchange had moved from polite interview into a confrontation of ideas, of principles, and ultimately of authority. Whoopi attempted to redirect the discussion, sensing the rising intensity. She asked about Blake's experience on The Voice, a subject familiar and safe, something that might diffuse the pressure and restore a conversational rhythm. But Joy wasn't finished. She had sensed the opening, and she pressed her advantage, challenging Blake's framing of truth-telling. She reminded him that country music, historically, had excluded many voices and communities, questioning how his claims of authenticity could coexist with an industry that had systematically marginalized certain groups. This was no idle accusation. It was a pointed critique of both the art form and its cultural context, a probe designed to test the sincerity of Blake's principles. Blake's jaw tightened ever so slightly. For a fraction of a second, the ease of his smile faltered, but only briefly. Then he responded with calm precision, arguing that country music had always welcomed anyone who could tell a genuine story and sing it from the heart, regardless of background, race, or gender. According to him, authenticity was not defined by one's identity, but by the sincerity of one's expression, the honesty of one's performance. What mattered most, he insisted, was whether the music resonated with truth, whether it connected with listeners on a human level, and whether the artist had something real to convey. Joy countered with facts and statistics, citing years of criticism aimed at the industry for its lack of diversity. She highlighted examples of systemic barriers, historical exclusions, and persistent disparities that suggested Blake's idealized vision of inclusivity might be more aspirational than reflective of reality. Her points were sharp evidence, based and designed to test the limits of his argument, challenging him to reconcile principle with practice. Blake shook his head slightly, dismissing the numbers not with disrespect, but with a steadfast belief in the transformative power of art. In his view, the truth of a song, the authenticity of a performer, and the emotional connection with the audience mattered more than statistics or historical precedent. His argument was not denial. It was reframing, asserting that while the industry might have flaws, the core principle of country music remained a space where honesty and heart transcended systemic limitation. And so the exchange continued, a dance of tension and principle. Each point, each rebuttal, each pause added to the charged atmosphere of the studio. What could have been a standard celebrity interview became a clash of ideas, a confrontation over art, culture, and the responsibilities of those in the public eye. Blake Shelton, the superstar accustomed to stages and audiences cheering his every note, was now measured not by applause, but by his ability to hold firm under scrutiny, to articulate his principles under pressure, and to engage with critique without faltering. The audience felt it, the crew felt it, the hosts felt it, and anyone watching at home could sense it through the television screen. This was more than a conversation. It was a moment that tested authority, authenticity, and conviction, a rare glimpse into the collision between celebrity, cultural commentary, and social responsibility. By the time the segment concluded, one thing was clear. Blake Shelton had not only defended his views, but had done so with poise, wit, and conviction. The confrontation had become a defining moment, illustrating the delicate balance between speaking one's truth and engaging responsibly with the world. And in doing so, it left a lasting impression, a reminder that even in the controlled environment of daytime television, real dialogue, real tension, and real human principles can create a spectacle more compelling than any scripted performance. He described what he had witnessed firsthand while touring the country, city after city, town after town, places that rarely made headlines or appeared in glossy magazines. Night after night, he said, he stood on stage and watched thousands of people from completely different walks of life come together as one. Factory workers stood beside teachers. Farmers sang shoulder to shoulder with college students. Young couples swayed next to elderly fans who had followed the music for decades. They didn't ask each other about politics or backgrounds. They didn't argue about labels. They sang the same songs, shouted the same lyrics, and shared the same emotions in a way that felt raw and unfiltered. To him, that unity mattered far more than any statistic printed on paper or charted in a report. It wasn't something that could be quantified or reduced to percentages. It was something you felt in your chest, something you could hear in the roar of a crowd when the lights dimmed and the first chord rang out. That was the America he recognized, the one that existed in real moments, not theoretical arguments. As he spoke, his voice carried the weight of frustration, but also conviction, as though he were trying to defend something deeply personal that he felt was constantly misunderstood. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances as the friction in the room became impossible to ignore. What had started as a lively discussion had now sharpened into something far more volatile. Sarah N. attempted to lighten the mood, leaning forward with a carefully phrased follow-up question, her tone deliberately upbeat. But it was clear that the effort came too late. Blake was already heated, and the fire behind his words showed no sign of cooling. He pressed on, his frustration spilling out more freely now. He accused people like Joy, those with massive platforms and cultural influence, of sitting in ivory towers, far removed from the realities of everyday Americans. He said they spoke about people rather than with them, telling others how to live, how to think, and what they were supposed to believe. According to him, they framed their opinions as moral certainty while dismissing anyone who disagreed as backward or unenlightened. His words landed heavily in the studio. He said flatly that Joy did not speak for country music fans, and certainly did not speak for America as a whole. The remark cut through the room like a blade, leaving a stunned quiet in its wake. Joy bristled immediately. Her posture stiffened, and her expression hardened as she demanded to know exactly what he meant by people like me. The question wasn't merely defensive. It carried a sharp edge, as if she were daring him to say out loud what she suspected he was implying. Blake didn't hesitate. His response was blunt, almost clinical in its delivery. He said he was talking about people who believed they knew better than everyone else, those who assumed moral and intellectual superiority while looking down on small, town and rural Americans as ignorant, uneducated, or incapable of independent thought. He said that kind of attitude was felt deeply by the very people Joy claimed to be speaking for, whether she realized it or not. The studio fell into complete silence. The warmth that had filled the room earlier vanished instantly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. Even the hum of the studio lights seemed louder in the absence of conversation. No one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that made everyone acutely aware they were witnessing a moment that could not be undone. Whoopi shifted in her seat, clearly struggling to regain control of the discussion. She opened her mouth as if to intervene, then closed it again, weighing her words carefully. This was no longer a manageable disagreement. It was a full-blown confrontation. Blake and Joy were no longer talking past each other. They were staring each other down, both unwilling to back away. Joy defended herself forcefully. She insisted she had never called anyone ignorant and rejected the notion that she looked down on rural Americans. Her voice rose slightly as she explained that her concerns had always been about having honest conversations around representation, inclusion, and progress. She said those discussions were necessary, even if they made people uncomfortable, and that challenging ideas was not the same as insulting people. Blake let out a short, bitter laugh that echoed uncomfortably in the quiet studio. He said that, from where he stood, it didn't feel like an honest conversation at all. It felt like judgment wrapped in polished language, like lectures delivered from a distance by people who had never bothered to listen. He said that when fans came up to him after shows, they didn't talk about ideology. They talked about working 2 jobs, raising families, struggling to make ends meet, and finding a few hours of joy in music that made them feel seen rather than scolded. The divide between them now felt vast and unbridgeable. Joy spoke of ideals and systemic change. Blake spoke of lived experience and emotional truth. Neither was willing to concede ground, and the gap between their perspectives only widened with every word exchanged. Around them, the hosts sat frozen, acutely aware that this was no longer just a heated exchange. It was a reflection of a much larger cultural fracture playing out in real time. The audience could feel it too, the sharp pull between 2 competing visions of America, both claiming legitimacy, both convinced the other simply didn't understand. As the confrontation dragged on, it became clear that no tidy resolution was coming. This was not the kind of disagreement that could be wrapped up neatly before a commercial break. It was messy, emotional, and deeply personal, an argument not just about music or politics, but about identity, respect, and who gets to define the national conversation. And in that charged silence, with cameras rolling and tempers flaring, one thing was unmistakable. The discussion had crossed a line from debate into something far more revealing, exposing fault lines that ran far deeper than anyone in the studio had anticipated. The moment on live television had transformed from what was intended as a friendly celebrity interview into something far more intense, almost resembling an interrogation rather than a conversation. Blake Shelton, the country music superstar, had walked onto the set expecting to discuss his craft, his albums, and the stories behind the songs that had made him a household name. Instead, he found himself being grilled about politics, social issues, and the controversies swirling around his public statements. From the very first exchange, it was clear that this would not be a standard promotional appearance. The tension was thick enough to slice through with a knife, and every second of it was being captured by cameras rolling live. Behind the scenes, the production team scrambled, trying to anticipate reactions, adjust camera angles, and manage the escalating confrontation, all while keeping the broadcast seamless. There was no room for error. This was live television at its most volatile, and the unpredictability added an electric charge to every word spoken, every gesture made. Joy Behar, one of the show's most outspoken and relentless hosts, slammed her hand onto the table with a force that reverberated through the studio. "I don't need a country singer telling me how to do my job," she declared, her voice firm, sharp, and laced with decades of accumulated authority in broadcasting. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Blake, conveying both challenge and indignation. It was a statement meant to assert control over the conversation, to remind the audience and her guest that she had navigated the high-stakes world of live television long before he had ever performed on a national stage. Blake, however, was not intimidated. He leaned back in his chair, a sharp, knowing smile spreading across his face. His body language radiated confidence, a combination of calm defiance and measured assertiveness. "And I don't need a talk show host telling me about country music," he shot back, his tone casual but edged with steel, "especially someone who has never set foot in Nashville." The remark landed with precision. It was not an attack on her personally, but a reminder of the expertise and lived experience that shaped his perspective. He was challenging the show's authority, questioning whether they truly understood the culture and nuances of the industry they were critiquing. Blake pressed further, pivoting to the broader issue of representation and inclusion within the media. "When was the last time you had a country artist on the show who wasn't being grilled about politics?" he asked, his Oklahoma accented voice rising slightly with incredulity. The question was pointed, designed to expose what he saw as a pattern, a focus on conflict and controversy over genuine exploration of music and artistry. It implied a subtle critique of the show's priorities, suggesting that country musicians were being used as convenient symbols or punching bags rather than being appreciated for their craft. Joy insisted that this wasn't true, arguing that the show had hosted plenty of country musicians over the years. Blake, unfazed, challenged her to name 3 who had appeared in the past 2 years. For a moment Joy hesitated. She opened her mouth, then closed it, caught off guard. The silence that followed was deafening, stretching through the studio and even into the homes of viewers watching live. The tension was thick, palpable, almost suffocating. In that pause, Blake had seized control of the narrative, highlighting the gap between words and action, between claim and reality. He leaned forward, emphasizing his point. "You don't really care about country music or the people behind it," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You use country artists as convenient punching bags whenever it suits your agenda." The accusation was sharp, cutting through the polite veneer of daytime television. It reframed the discussion from entertainment to principle, from promotion to accountability. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the rising temperature, finally stepped in, her voice calm but authoritative. She urged both sides to slow down, to take a breath, and to cool off before the confrontation spiraled further. But Blake wasn't finished. The frustration that had been simmering beneath his grin boiled over. His Oklahoma accent became more pronounced as he vented, each word laced with a mixture of exasperation and passion. "I'm tired of watching the media attack country music and its fans," he said. "They aren't the enemy," he added, making clear that his critique was not personal but principled. "But the way the show treats them, that's exactly how they're being painted." Joy regained her composure quickly, insisting that no one was calling him the enemy, but the divide was unmistakable. The tension had reached a new peak. The confrontation had cemented itself as one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. Viewers could sense the clash of authority, experience, and perspective unfolding in real time, making the exchange impossible to ignore. Joy pressed further, insisting that when someone makes statements that could be interpreted as exclusionary, it's natural for people to call that out. Her words were firm, moralistic, and precise, as though she were reminding the audience and her guest of the responsibilities inherent in a public platform. Blake's voice rose sharply at the word exclusionary. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from every gesture. "I've spent my entire career trying to bring people together through music," he said. He listed his contributions, mentoring singers from a diverse array of backgrounds on The Voice, collaborating with artists across genres, and using his platform to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. His argument was rooted in lived experience, in action rather than rhetoric. Then, in a bold rhetorical pivot, he turned the question back on her. "What have you done to bring people together, besides dividing them on this show every single day?" The audience fell completely silent. You could hear the subtle shift of hundreds of people in their seats, the uneasy shuffle of weight as the verbal duel intensified. Every eye was fixed on the table, on the tension radiating from the confrontation, on the extraordinary back and forth that had moved beyond entertainment into raw, unfiltered challenge. Son and host attempted to step in, aiming to calm the escalating energy, but Joy cut her off sharply. She snapped, demanding to know how Blake dared to question her record, insisting that she had been fighting for civil rights and equality long before he was famous. Her words carried the weight of decades of experience and moral authority, intended to reassert dominance and control over the conversation. Blake, undeterred, laughed harshly, not mockingly, but as a dismissal of what he saw as performative bravado. "Where I come from," he said, his tone steady and piercing, "fighting means getting your hands dirty, not sitting behind a desk throwing stones at people." His remark landed like a challenge, a provocation that reframed the argument entirely. Experience, authenticity, and action versus posturing, privilege, and commentary. Color drained from Joy's face as she warned him to watch his tone. Blake leaned forward, locking eyes with her, unflinching. "Or what?" he asked, the tension in his voice sharp enough to cut through the room. "Would you cancel me, or write a scathing article about how terrible I am?" The words were direct, unapologetic, and demonstrated his comfort with controversy, his understanding of the interplay between media, scrutiny, and celebrity. He punctuated his point by asserting that he had been in the business long enough to know that controversy sells records and drives conversation. His understanding of the mechanics of fame, media, and public perception added an extra layer of strategic brilliance to his responses. Alyssa Farah Griffin attempted to intervene, suggesting a safer topic: Blake's charity work, his disaster relief efforts, and the many positive contributions he had made beyond the stage. But Blake was locked onto Joy, determined to make his point. He refused to let the conversation be derailed or diluted. The conflict had become more than a mere disagreement. It was a confrontation over principles, authority, and the treatment of country music and its culture in the broader media landscape. By this point, the studio was charged, the audience rapt, and the energy on set crackling. The exchange had evolved from a routine interview into a historic clash of personalities, ideas, and ideologies. Live television, for all its unpredictability, had never felt more alive. The confrontation had reached a level where every pause, every glance, every subtle movement became a statement in itself. It was not only one of the most heated moments of the day, it was destined to be remembered as one of the most explosive confrontations in the history of daytime television.